Jerusalem, in the early 12th century, was a city soaked in contradiction. The First Crusade had ended in victory, yet peace never came. Pilgrims streamed toward the Holy Sepulchre, walking roads littered with corpses, bandits, and the echoes of holy war. Faith promised salvation, but violence governed reality. It was in this brutal landscape that a small group of knights gathered around a dangerous idea: to protect pilgrims by the sword, while living as monks bound by sacred vows. They called themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ. There were only 9 of them, men of minor nobility, scarred by war and devotion in equal measure, who owned no lands, no banners, no visible power. They slept in simple quarters near the ruins of Solomon's Temple, a location heavy with ancient symbolism and unanswered questions. Officially, their purpose was humble, almost forgettable. Unofficially, their presence unsettled those who understood the weight of that ground. The medieval world offered no separation between belief and bloodshed. Kings ruled by divine right, armies marched under the cross, and death was seen as a pathway to heaven. In such a world, warrior monks did not seem unnatural, yet something about this new brotherhood felt different, deliberate, almost calculated. They answered to no king, only to God, and soon to the Pope himself. Historians often describe these beginnings as modest, even fragile. What they rarely pause to explain is how an order born in poverty and obscurity rose with alarming speed. Within a generation, these knights. In medieval Europe, identity was rigid. A man was either a monk who prayed or a knight who killed. The Knights Templar shattered that boundary with startling confidence. They swore vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, yet trained relentlessly for war. Their hands learned both scripture and steel, their days divided between prayer and preparation for death. To many contemporaries, this contradiction felt unsettling, even blasphemous. The Church had always warned that violence stained the soul. Killing, even in war, demanded penance. Yet the Templars were told something extraordinary, that killing in defense of Christ was not a sin at all, but a sacred duty. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most powerful voices of the age, gave this idea theological armor. In his writings, he argued that a Templar who killed an enemy did not commit murder, but malicide, the destruction of evil itself. This reasoning rewrote centuries of Christian morality. A knight could now be both holy and lethal, absolved in advance for bloodshed. The result was an order unlike anything Europe had seen, disciplined beyond feudal armies, obedient beyond mercenaries, and motivated by salvation itself. They did not fight for land or gold, but for eternal reward. The Church's approval raises an unsettling question. Why endorse an order so extreme, so powerful, and so difficult to control? Some historians argue necessity forced innovation. Others suspect the Church saw the Templars as useful instruments for dangers not yet spoken aloud. At first, few noticed when the Templars rode into battle. They wore plain white cloaks, marked only by a red cross, and traveled without the pageantry of feudal lords. But on the roads of the Holy Land, patterns began to emerge. Where other armies broke under ambush or exhaustion, the Templars held formation. Where knights fled to ransom themselves, these men advanced without hesitation, seemingly indifferent to death. Their strength did not come from numbers, but from discipline. Templars trained as a unit, obeying commands instantly, abandoning personal glory for collective survival. They fought in silence, charged in rigid lines, and refused retreat unless ordered. Muslim chroniclers took notice, describing them as relentless and terrifying opponents who could not be intimidated or bribed. Fear followed their banners long before they arrived. Victories multiplied, and with them came reputation. Nobles across Europe sent sons and wealth to the order, believing association with the Templars brought divine favor. Castles, lands, and privileges poured in, transforming poverty into logistical power almost overnight, yet their lifestyle barely changed. They ate simply, slept communally, and drilled constantly, reinforcing the image of men who lived only to fight and pray. Historians explain this rise through organization and faith. What they struggle to explain is speed. No medieval institution grew so lethal, so efficient, so feared in so little time. It was as if the Templars had been preparing for this role long before history noticed them. That silence still echoes through chronicles, unanswered, unsettling, ominous, enduring. The rise of the Templars did not inspire admiration alone. As their fortresses spread across Europe and the Holy Land, unease settled quietly among those who ruled by crown and crozier. These knights answered to neither. They paid no taxes, swore no feudal loyalty, and crossed borders as if borders did not exist. To kings accustomed to absolute authority, this independence felt dangerous. Clergy, too, began to murmur. The Templars confessed only to their own priests, followed secret internal rules, and conducted rituals closed to outsiders. Chroniclers record whispers, not accusations, hints that something about the order felt hidden, inaccessible, untouchable. Power, when wrapped in silence, breeds suspicion. What unsettled rulers most was not what the Templars did, but what they refused to do. They would not kneel to monarchs, would not reveal their inner workings, would not slow their accumulation of wealth and land. Castles rose in strategic locations, not for show, but for control. Roads, ports, and treasuries quietly fell under their influence. Fear grew long before charges of heresy were ever spoken aloud. Some feared an army loyal only to itself. Others feared knowledge gathered in distant lands, ideas imported from cultures the church barely understood. A few dared to wonder whether the Templars served a mission older, deeper, and more secret than defending pilgrims. History rarely records fear until it explodes, but in these early years it was already there, waiting, patient, watching. And few realized how close this quiet dread was to becoming catastrophe itself. Jerusalem was not merely a city to medieval Christians. It was a wound in the world, a place where heaven and earth were believed to overlap. At its heart stood the Temple Mount, revered, feared, and fiercely contested. Long before the Crusades, it had been sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. Access was restricted, knowledge controlled, and legends buried beneath layers of conquest. Yet when the Knights Templar arrived, they were granted something astonishing: headquarters directly on this forbidden ground. The 9 knights were housed in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, believed at the time to stand atop the ruins of the Temple of Solomon. Officially, this was an act of convenience. Unofficially, it made little sense. Warrior monks were placed at the most symbolically charged location in the known world, a site associated with divine presence, lost wisdom, and apocalyptic prophecy. Few questioned the decision, perhaps because questioning sacred authority was itself dangerous. The Temple of Solomon was said to have housed the Ark of the Covenant, sacred texts, and secrets entrusted only to ancient priesthoods. Medieval minds believed the temple concealed more than stone and relics. It concealed power. By placing the Templars there, the church was either demonstrating immense trust or remarkable recklessness. Historians often gloss over this detail, calling it coincidence or political necessity. But coincidences rarely shape history so profoundly. Why choose this location, of all places? Why give impoverished knights access to ground no other order was allowed to disturb? The answer, whatever it was, lay buried beneath Jerusalem, waiting. For nearly a decade after their founding, the Knights Templar barely fought. This is one of the strangest details in their history and one of the least discussed. While other crusading orders rushed to the battlefield, the Templars remained largely absent from recorded combat. Instead, they stayed in Jerusalem beneath the Temple Mount, silent and unseen. 9 nights, 9 years, almost no military engagements. Medieval chroniclers noticed the absence but offered no explanation. What occupied these men during a time of constant warfare? Protection of pilgrims alone cannot account for such prolonged inactivity, especially when danger was everywhere. The silence suggests purpose, not neglect. Later traditions claim the Templars were excavating. Beneath the Temple Mount lay tunnels, chambers, and ruins dating back thousands of years. Access to these spaces was rare, tightly controlled, and dangerous. Yet the Templars had freedom to explore, to dig, and to search without oversight. What they were searching for remains unknown, but something happened during those years. When the Templars finally emerged into wider history, they were transformed. Their numbers increased rapidly, donations poured in, papal favor intensified. It was as if an unseen discovery had rewritten their destiny. Historians struggle to explain this sudden shift, often dismissing the silence as poor record-keeping. But poor records do not create power. Something beneath Jerusalem changed the course of the order forever. Legends quickly filled the silence left by missing records. Some claimed the Templars uncovered sacred relics, long thought lost, objects tied to biblical authority and divine legitimacy. Others spoke of ancient manuscripts, pre-Christian texts that described a different origin of faith itself. These were not simple treasures of gold, but dangerous knowledge capable of reshaping belief. The most persistent legends involve the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, and secret writings attributed to Solomon. Such items, if real, would have granted the Templars unimaginable symbolic power. Even rumors of possession could explain the sudden flood of wealth and protection they received afterward. Kings and popes alike treated them differently, as if the order now carried an unspoken importance. Skeptical historians argue that no physical evidence survives, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when secrecy was the foundation of survival. If the Templars found nothing, their meteoric rise makes little sense. Institutions do not elevate obscure orders without reason. What is undeniable is timing. The years beneath the Temple Mount ended. Immediately after, the Templars became indispensable. Their privileges expanded, their influence spread, and their autonomy deepened. Something had been brought into the light, even if history refuses to name it. And once knowledge changes hands, it cannot be unseen. The church tolerated many things, but there was one line it never allowed to be crossed: control of truth. Doctrine was power, and power depended on obedience. If the Templars had uncovered knowledge that contradicted established theology, even subtly, it would have represented an existential threat. Faith could survive violence. It could not survive doubt. Some historians suggest the Templars encountered Gnostic ideas, ancient beliefs predating Christianity that challenged the nature of God, creation, and salvation. Others believe the danger lay in historical truth evidence that sacred narratives had been altered, simplified, or manipulated over centuries. Such discoveries would not need to be preached to be dangerous. Simply existing was enough. The Church's reaction was not immediate, which makes it more unsettling. Instead of suppression, the Templars were elevated, protected, isolated. It was as if authorities chose containment over confrontation, allowing the order to exist under watchful eyes. But containment only works temporarily. Over time, fear replaced caution. An order that possessed forbidden knowledge and absolute independence could not be trusted indefinitely. When political opportunity finally aligned with religious anxiety, the response was swift and brutal. Some historians argue this was the moment the Templars were doomed, not when accusations were made, but when they learned something they were never meant to know. War was expensive, pilgrimage was dangerous, and medieval Europe had no safe way to move wealth across borders. Coins invited thieves, and trust rarely extended beyond a single city. Into this chaos stepped the Knights Templar, quietly solving a problem no king had managed to master. Pilgrims could deposit money at a Templar house in Paris and retrieve its value in Jerusalem using coded documents. No gold traveled, only trust did. This system was revolutionary. The Templars created secure vaults, standardized records, and a network of fortified commanderies stretching across continents. They understood logistics, secrecy, and risk with unnerving precision. Within decades, they were safeguarding fortunes, ransoms, and royal treasuries. Warrior monks had become financial architects. What made this transformation unsettling was speed. Banking systems usually evolve slowly, constrained by law and custom. The Templars bypassed both. Papal protection placed them beyond local authority, allowing innovation without oversight. Their vows of poverty made them appear incorruptible, which only increased confidence. People trusted them because they seemed to want nothing. Historians call this pragmatism born of necessity. But necessity alone does not explain sophistication. The Templars understood credit, transfers, and risk management centuries ahead of common practice. It was as if they were applying knowledge already known rather than inventing it from scratch. Why were men trained for holy war suddenly controlling Europe's money? And why did the Church permit an armed order to dominate the most powerful force of all? Finance? The answer lies not in gold, but in control. And control always comes at a cost. As the Templars' financial network expanded, kings began to rely on it. Wars were funded through Templar vaults. Ransoms passed through their hands. Royal treasuries were stored behind their walls. Slowly, dangerously, Europe's rulers became dependent on an order that owed them nothing in return. This dependence created an imbalance unseen in medieval politics. A king could command armies, but he could not command the Templars. They answered only to the Pope and ultimately to their own internal authority. Loans given by the order carried no visible interest, yet repayment was expected. Power flowed quietly in one direction. Philip IV of France was not alone in his reliance. English, Aragonese, and Iberian monarchs all leaned on Templar wealth during crisis. The order became the financial backbone of Christendom, indispensable yet unaccountable. That paradox bred resentment. When kings are indebted, pride erodes quickly. Chronicles hint at private fury, at rulers forced to negotiate with men who refused to kneel. The Templars did not threaten, they did not need to. Their silence carried more weight than armies. Historians often frame this relationship as mutual benefit. But benefit implies equality, and this was not equal. The Templars controlled access to resources that sustained crowns themselves. What happens when sovereign power depends on those sworn to no throne? History suggests only one outcome: fear followed by force. The Knights Templar existed beyond the reach of ordinary law. Papal decrees exempted them from taxes, tolls, and local courts. They crossed borders freely, moved goods without inspection, and operated fortresses immune to royal command. In effect, they formed a parallel system of power embedded within every kingdom they served. Their properties dotted Europe like strategic nodes, each answering to the order rather than local rulers. Castles guarded trade routes. Commanderies functioned as banks, armories, and administrative centers. This was not accidental growth. It was design. To ordinary people, the Templars appeared disciplined and devout. To rulers, they appeared untouchable. No audit could reach them. No investigation could penetrate their secrecy. Even bishops hesitated to question them. Immunity bred mystery, and mystery bred fear. Historians describe this autonomy as a necessary reward for service. But rewards rarely come without limits. The Templars had no limits. They collected wealth, knowledge, and influence while remaining legally invisible. In modern terms, they were a transnational organization operating above state control. This status unsettled every medieval assumption about authority. Kings ruled land. The church ruled souls. The Templars seemed to exist between both, loyal to neither fully. They were not rebels, but they were not subjects. And when power cannot be categorized, it becomes threatening simply by existing. Wealth attracts envy, but concentrated power attracts fear. By the early 14th century, the Templars possessed both. Their treasuries were vast, their networks global, and their loyalty ambiguous. For desperate rulers, this combination was intolerable. It is tempting to say greed destroyed the Templars. That narrative is simple, comforting, and incomplete. Kings have seized wealth before without erasing entire orders. What followed the Templars was not confiscation alone, but annihilation. Their reputation was dismantled, their members humiliated, their name poisoned forever. Money may have provided motive, but it does not explain method. Accusations of heresy, ritual blasphemy, and secret crimes were designed not just to seize assets, but to destroy credibility. Once labeled enemies of God, the Templars could not defend themselves without undermining the church itself. Historians struggle with this excess. If the goal was debt relief, why the torture? Why the public executions? Why the obsession with secret rites? These were not the actions of rulers solving a financial problem. They were the actions of men erasing a perceived existential threat. Wealth made the Templars visible. Independence made them dangerous, but something else made them unforgivable. Money opened the door. Fear pushed everyone through it. Philip IV of France ruled with ambition, sharpened by desperation. Known to history as Philip the Fair, he inherited a kingdom strained by war, lavish court expenses, and a currency constantly on the verge of collapse. His reign was marked by financial crisis after financial crisis, each one eroding royal authority. Wars against England and Flanders drained the treasury, while internal reforms provoked unrest. The crown needed money, and it needed it desperately. To solve this, Philip had already shown a willingness to cross lines others feared. He debased the currency, expelled Jewish communities to seize their assets, and even clashed openly with the papacy. Yet none of these measures were enough. Behind the scenes, one fact became impossible to ignore. The Knights Templar were rich, organized, and sitting on reserves the king could not touch. The Templars held royal funds, managed loans, and controlled vast estates across France. Worse still, they were immune to Philip's authority. He could not tax them, command them, or audit their wealth. For a king struggling to assert dominance, this was intolerable. Some historians argue the Templars were not simply unfortunate victims of circumstance. They were targeted, hunted. Philip did not wake one day and decide to destroy them. The idea grew slowly, fed by debt, pride, and fear. The more dependent he became on the order, the more dangerous they appeared. In Philip's eyes, their very existence was an accusation, a reminder that true power no longer rested solely with the crown. Philip IV did not initially seek destruction. Control was enough. He attempted to insert himself into the Templars' affairs, proposing reforms, oversight, even a merger with other military orders under royal influence. Each attempt was quietly refused. The Templars listened respectfully, then continued as they always had. These refusals were not dramatic, but they were absolute. The order answered only to the Pope, and even papal authority over them was limited. To Philip, this was humiliation disguised as protocol. A king reduced to negotiation with men who wore no crown and swore no loyalty to him. Resentment hardened into obsession. Chroniclers describe Philip's growing fixation on the order, his suspicion that they hid more than wealth behind their walls. Rumors reached the court, whispers of secret rituals and internal oaths. Whether Philip believed them at first is unclear. What mattered was usefulness. Rumors can be sharpened into weapons. As diplomatic avenues closed, darker ideas took shape. Control through law was impossible, so control through accusation became attractive. If the Templars could be redefined as criminals rather than servants of God, their protections would collapse overnight. This shift marked a turning point. Once Philip stopped seeing the Templars as a resource and began seeing them as a threat, compromise ended. What followed was not reform, but strategy. And strategy, when driven by desperation, rarely ends peacefully. The accusations against the Knights Templar did not emerge organically. They appeared fully formed, precise, and devastating. Charges of heresy, idol worship, denial of Christ, and obscene initiation rites spread rapidly across France. The specificity was shocking, so was the timing. Philip's agents relied heavily on testimony from disgraced former Templars, imprisoned criminals, and men promised freedom in exchange for cooperation. Confessions were extracted under torture, then circulated as proof. The narrative was crafted carefully, secret rituals, hidden idols, and blasphemy concealed beneath pious appearances. Europe reeled. The idea that God's most feared warriors were traitors to Christ himself was almost unthinkable. That shock was the point. Accusations of financial corruption could be debated. Accusations of heresy silenced opposition. What makes this moment unsettling is coordination. Arrest warrants were sealed, orders synchronized, and confessions prepared before the first knight was taken into custody. This was not an investigation, it was an operation. Historians note how conveniently the charges aligned with Philip's needs. By framing the Templars as enemies of God, he transformed debt into righteousness. Resistance became sin. Silence became guilt. The crime was manufactured not to uncover truth, but to end a problem no sword could solve. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, the plan unfolded with ruthless precision. Across France, Templars were arrested simultaneously, denied warning or defense. Their properties were seized, their leaders imprisoned, their reputation shattered overnight. It was one of the most coordinated mass arrests in medieval history. Officially, this was justice. In reality, it was a political execution carried out through legal theater. Trials were staged, evidence controlled, outcomes predetermined. The objective was not judgment, but eradication. Yet one detail continues to trouble historians. If this was merely a political maneuver, why insist on heresy? Why not accuse the Templars of treason, corruption, or financial crimes? Such charges would have sufficed to dissolve the order and seize its wealth. Heresy, however, did something more powerful. It poisoned memory. It ensured the Templars would not be mourned as victims, but feared as traitors. Their destruction needed to be total, extending beyond bodies to belief. This suggests the threat they posed was not only political. Something about the Templars required moral annihilation, not just removal. Politics explains the motive. Heresy explains the method. But the intensity hints at something deeper, something that made their continued existence intolerable. And that unanswered question is where the real mystery begins. Dawn broke quietly across France on Friday, October 13th, 1307. There were no bells, no proclamations, no visible sign that history was about to fracture. Inside Templar commanderies, men followed routine prayers, unaware that sealed orders were being opened across the kingdom at the same moment. By nightfall, thousands would be in chains. Royal officials arrived without warning. Doors were forced open. Knights who had fought for Christendom were read accusations they barely had time to comprehend. There were no warrants presented, no opportunities whispered for escape. The arrests were total, synchronized, and merciless. From Paris to the provinces, the same scene unfolded again and again, as if rehearsed. What stunned contemporaries was not only the scale, but the silence that followed. No immediate trials, no formal charges explained, just imprisonment. The order that had once guarded kings now found itself stripped of protection overnight, and their papal privileges meant nothing in the face of coordinated force. Chroniclers struggled to describe the shock. An institution that seemed eternal collapsed in a single day. Some Templars believed it was a mistake that would be corrected once Rome intervened. Others sensed something darker, something carefully planned to leave no room for defense. Historians often call this the beginning of the end, but for those who lived it, it felt like the end of reality itself. Loyalty offered no shield. Faith offered no explanation. In one morning, the most powerful order in Christendom became helpless prisoners, and the world would never see Friday the 13th the same way again. Imprisonment was only the beginning. In cold stone cells, the machinery of confession began to turn. Interrogators did not seek truth in the modern sense. They sought words that matched a predetermined story. Pain became the language through which those words were spoken. Templars were stretched on racks, burned with hot irons, and suspended by their limbs until joints tore apart. Some were starved. Others were threatened with death or eternal damnation. Under such conditions, resistance dissolved quickly. Confessions emerged, fragmented, contradictory, desperate. The question historians still wrestle with is simple and devastating. Can truth survive unlimited pain? Medieval law believed confession under torture revealed hidden guilt. Modern understanding recognizes it as a factory for lies. Men confess to anything that would make suffering stop. Records show startling inconsistencies. A knight would confess one day, recant the next, then confess again under renewed torment. The same crimes were described differently in different regions, shaped by the expectations of interrogators. This was not discovery, it was performance. Yet these confessions carried immense power. Written down, sealed, and circulated, they became proof. Doubt was silenced by parchment-bearing broken words. Those who resisted longest were broken publicly as examples. What haunts historians is not that confessions were extracted, but that authorities accepted them eagerly. Pain did not reveal hidden crimes, it created them. And once spoken, those words could never be taken back without consequence. The accusations leveled against the Templars were not ordinary crimes. They were bizarre, theatrical, and deeply symbolic. Knights were accused of spitting on the cross, denying Christ during initiation, worshiping a mysterious idol, and engaging in secret rites forbidden by the Church. These were not random allegations. Each one struck at the foundation of Christian identity. To spit on the cross was to reject salvation. To deny Christ was to forfeit the soul. Idol worship evoked ancient heresies the Church had spent centuries eradicating. The imagery was deliberate. Historians often ask why such extreme charges were chosen. Financial corruption or political treason would have been easier to prove. But those crimes would not justify total annihilation. Heresy did. What makes the charges unsettling is repetition. Across interrogations, references appear to a bearded head, whispered words, and forbidden gestures. Skeptics argue these details were suggested by interrogators. Others wonder why the same strange elements surface again and again. If the accusations were entirely fabricated, why choose symbols so specific, so archaic? Why risk disbelief with claims that bordered on the fantastical? Some historians suspect these stories were distortions of misunderstood rituals. Others fear they hint at something the Church wanted buried beneath ridicule. The crimes were strange enough to shock Europe into silence, and silence, once achieved, is difficult to break. After torture ended, something unexpected happened. Many Templars retracted their confessions. Standing before church councils, weakened but resolute, they declared their innocence. They claimed their words had been forced, their faith intact. For this defiance, some were burned alive. Others, however, said nothing at all. They neither confessed nor denied. They accepted imprisonment, even execution, without explanation. This silence unsettled observers more than screams ever had. Innocent men protest. Guilty men bargain. But these men endured. Historians debate what this silence means. Fear is the simplest answer. Trauma can paralyze speech. But not all were broken. Some were articulate, educated, and fully aware of the stakes. Still, they chose quiet. One theory suggests loyalty. Speaking might have implicated brothers still free. Another suggests obedience, a final vow kept even in death. But darker possibilities exist. Silence can also protect secrets more valuable than life itself. If the Templars had uncovered forbidden knowledge, revealing it under pressure would have guaranteed its destruction. Silence then becomes strategy rather than surrender, a way to let truth die with them. We may never know which explanation is correct, but history remembers this moment clearly. Faced with fire and fear, some men chose silence, and in doing so, they left behind a mystery no confession could ever resolve. Pope Clement XI did not inherit the Templar crisis. It was forced upon him. Elevated to the papacy through political compromise, Clement ruled without the confidence or authority of his predecessors. He was a French pope in an era when France dominated Europe, and Philip IV understood this weakness well. From the beginning, Clement faced a dilemma with no safe resolution. The accusations against the Templars shocked him. As Pope, he alone held authority over the order. No king had the legal right to arrest them. Yet Philip acted first, presenting confessions, witnesses, and a narrative already hardened into certainty. To oppose the king openly risked schism. To comply risked injustice. Clement hesitated. He ordered inquiries, delayed decisions, and attempted to reassert papal control over the trials. This hesitation is often misread as indecision. In reality, it reflected fear. If the Templars were innocent, the Church was witnessing the destruction of its own creation. If they were guilty, then heresy had flourished unchecked under papal protection. Either conclusion was catastrophic. Clement's correspondence reveals a man trying to preserve institutional stability rather than uncover truth. He questioned procedures, not outcomes. He negotiated language, not justice. Historians still argue whether Clement believed the accusations. What matters is that he understood the stakes. This was no longer about knights or crimes. It was about whether the Church could survive the revelation that it had empowered something it could no longer control. Clement was not judging the Templars alone. He was deciding what version of the Church would endure. Once the papacy intervened, the trials should have clarified everything. Instead, they grew more chaotic. Across Europe, different courts reached different conclusions. In some regions, Templars were acquitted. In others, they were condemned. The same evidence produced opposing verdicts, exposing deep fractures in authority. This inconsistency troubled even medieval observers. If the Templars were truly heretics, guilt should have been obvious everywhere. Yet bishops disagreed, councils stalled, and testimonies contradicted one another. Some judges rejected confessions extracted under torture. Others accepted them without question. Justice depended entirely on geography. The confusion dragged on for years. Councils convened, dissolved, then reconvened. Witnesses recanted. New accusations emerged, then vanished. The process seemed designed not to resolve guilt, but to exhaust resistance. Historians suggest this chaos was intentional. A clear verdict would force accountability. Ambiguity allowed flexibility. Kings could seize assets. The Church could claim caution. No one had to admit error. What stands out is that the trials never converged on truth. They circled it endlessly, avoiding conclusions that would implicate powerful institutions. Innocence would indict the crown. Guilt would indict the Church. So uncertainty became policy. For the imprisoned Templars, this meant endless waiting. For historians, it means unresolved contradiction. If guilt was certain, why did justice hesitate? And if innocence was possible, why did no one dare say it aloud? The trials refused to end because ending them required honesty no authority could afford. Centuries later, historians searching Vatican archives noticed something unsettling. Records referenced in medieval correspondence no longer existed. Testimonies cited in council debates were missing. Entire files had vanished, leaving behind only traces of their former presence. This absence is not accidental. Medieval archives were meticulous, especially when documenting trials of this magnitude. Missing documents suggest deliberate removal. The question is not whether something disappeared, but why. Some files reportedly contained statements favorable to the Templars. Others detailed papal doubts about the legality of proceedings. A few hinted at private absolutions granted quietly, contradicting public condemnation. These documents, if preserved, would complicate the official narrative. The Vatican has long denied intentional suppression. Fires, floods, and time are convenient explanations. Yet the pattern remains selective. Damaging material vanished. Supporting material survived. In 2001, the discovery of the Chinon parchment confirmed long-held suspicions. It revealed that Pope Clement had absolved Templar leaders of heresy years before the order was dissolved. This single document changed everything. If absolution existed, what else had been removed? Historians now suspect the archives were curated to protect institutional memory, not to erase the Templars entirely, but to prevent uncomfortable questions from resurfacing. What did the Church not want remembered? Perhaps not guilt or innocence, but hesitation. Doubt preserved on parchment can be more dangerous than heresy spoken aloud, and once removed, silence becomes official history. In 1312, the Knights Templar ceased to exist. Pope Clement IX formally dissolved the order, transferring its assets and disbanding its structure. Yet, in a decision that still confounds scholars, he did not declare the Templars guilty of heresy. This distinction matters. Dissolution implies necessity, not guilt. Condemnation implies proof. Clement chose the former, citing scandal, confusion, and the need for peace within Christendom. It was a legal compromise designed to end the crisis without answering its central question. This outcome created a paradox. The order was destroyed, its members imprisoned or executed, its name ruined. Yet no definitive judgment of guilt was ever issued. Innocence was not proclaimed, but neither was conviction. Historians interpret this as political pragmatism. Declaring innocence would anger kings. Declaring guilt would implicate the Church. Dissolution avoided both outcomes, preserving authority at the cost of truth. For centuries, this ambiguity shaped memory. The Templars existed in a liminal space between villain and victim. Popular imagination filled the gap with legends, while official history remained carefully vague. What haunts scholars is intentionality. And this was not a failure of law. It was a deliberate refusal to conclude. The Church closed the case without closing the question. An order erased without judgment leaves behind a vacuum, and vacuums invite speculation. The dissolution of the Templars did not end their story. It ensured it would never truly be resolved. Jacques de Molay was not the man history expected to end an empire. He was not a revolutionary nor a mystic prophet. He was a soldier, shaped by decades of discipline, loyalty, and obedience to an order he believed eternal. When the arrests came, de Molay did not flee. He remained in Paris, trusting in papal authority and the righteousness of his cause. From the beginning, he resisted confession. Under interrogation, he wavered only briefly, then withdrew every admission. Unlike many of his brothers, he chose consistency over survival. Years passed in captivity. His body weakened, but his resolve did not. Chroniclers describe him as calm, even stubborn, refusing to legitimize accusations he believed false. What set de Molay apart was not defiance, but faith. He believed the Church would correct the injustice. Even as trials dragged on and allies vanished, he clung to the idea that truth still mattered. That belief would ultimately cost him his life. When offered one final chance to confess publicly and save himself, de Molay refused. He chose execution over falsehood, a decision that shocked onlookers who expected surrender. In that moment, he ceased to be a political prisoner and became a symbol. Historians debate whether de Molay knew something others did not, whether he protected secrets or simply his honor. What is certain is this: when everything was taken from him, he still refused to lie, and history remembers men like that differently, especially when fire follows silence. On March 18, 1315, Jacques de Molay was led onto a small island in the Seine, the Ile de la Cité, within sight of Notre Dame. A wooden pyre awaited him. The sentence had already been decided. This was not justice, it was finality. Witnesses described an eerie stillness as the flames were prepared. De Molay stood beside another Templar leader, bound but unbroken. At the last moment, both men were expected to confirm their confessions. Instead, de Molay spoke, clearly retracting every charge and proclaiming the order's innocence before God and men. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and this public reversal disrupted the script. There would be no mercy now. Fire was lit immediately, transforming the execution into something ritualistic, almost ceremonial. Chroniclers noted how de Molay faced the flames without struggle, calling upon God as smoke swallowed his voice. Eyewitness accounts emphasize his composure. He did not scream. He did not beg. He burned as if performing an act of testimony rather than punishment. For medieval observers, such a death carried meaning. Innocent men, it was believed, faced execution with calm. The guilty broke. The location mattered. The heart of Paris, the seat of royal and religious power. De Molay's death was meant to close a chapter publicly, decisively. Instead, it planted doubt in the minds of those who watched a condemned man die like a martyr. According to legend, as the flames rose, Jacques de Molay issued a final declaration. He called upon God to judge those responsible for the order's destruction and summoned both Pope Clement I and King Philip de Hathin to answer before the divine court within a year. Medieval chroniclers recorded the words with varying detail, but the message remained the same. Judgment was coming. What happened next ensured the story would never fade. Within months, Pope Clement V fell ill and died, his body weakened by disease. Not long after, Philip IV suffered a sudden stroke during a hunt, dying before the year ended. Two of the most powerful men in Europe were gone, just as the curse predicted. Skeptics dismiss this as coincidence, pointing to poor health and medieval life expectancy. Believers see something else entirely. In a world that viewed divine justice as immediate and personal, timing mattered. The deaths were too close, too precise, too symbolically charged to ignore. The legend spread rapidly. Whispers traveled through monasteries, courts, and taverns. The idea took hold that the Templars had been wronged, and that heaven itself had responded. For rulers, this was deeply unsettling. Authority depended on the belief that God supported power, not punished it. Whether the curse was truly spoken or added later hardly matters. What matters is belief. Once people believed divine retribution had occurred, the destruction of the Templars no longer looked righteous. It looked cursed. And curses have a way of reshaping memory forever. History is filled with coincidences, but some patterns refuse to remain comfortably random. After Philip IV's death, his sons followed him to the grave in quick succession, each reign short and troubled. Within 14 years, the direct Capuchin line ended. For medieval observers, this felt less like chance and more like consequence. Historians caution against myth-making. Dynasties fall for many reasons. Disease, politics, and instability explain much, yet the human mind searches for meaning, especially when injustice precedes collapse. The Templar curse provided a narrative that made sense of sudden decline. What makes this unsettling is repetition. Similar stories appear across cultures, where suppressed orders, executed leaders, and broken oaths are followed by misfortune. Whether psychological or symbolic, the pattern persists. Power that destroys without truth rarely rests easily. Some scholars suggest the curse represents collective guilt rather than supernatural judgment. A society aware it committed injustice projects punishment onto fate. Others argue myths endure because they encode warnings. Erased truth and instability follows, whether coincidence or something older. The deaths that followed de Molay's execution ensured the Templars were never fully erased. Their story did not end in flames. It echoed forward, entwined with decline, fear, and unanswered questions. History may dismiss curses, but it cannot dismiss patterns. And the pattern left by the Templars continues to trouble anyone who looks too closely. In the days before the arrests of 1307, something quietly disappeared from the historical record. Templar ships anchored in French ports vanished. No royal orders explain their departure. No customs records list their cargo. By the time Philip's men seized Templar properties, the docks were empty. Whatever those ships carried was already gone. The Templars maintained a formidable fleet, primarily operating from the port of La Rochelle. These vessels were not merchant ships in the ordinary sense. They were secure, well-guarded, and accustomed to transporting valuables across dangerous waters. When the arrests came, Philip expected to seize vast, movable wealth. Instead, he found vaults strangely bare. Where did the ships go? Some suggest they sailed to Portugal, where the order still enjoyed royal protection. Others argue Scotland, locked in conflict with England and hostile to papal authority, offered refuge. There are even rumors of routes toward the Mediterranean or beyond, paths unrecorded and untraceable. The timing is what unsettles historians. The fleet vanished just before the trap closed. This suggests foreknowledge. Someone warned the order. Someone understood what was coming. That alone contradicts the idea of total surprise. What did the ships carry? Gold and silver are the obvious answers, but those leave trails. Knowledge does not. Manuscripts, relics, records, and symbols of authority would fit neatly into chests without attracting attention. The missing fleet remains one of the clearest signs that the Templars were not entirely helpless. As their world collapsed, something escaped, and history still does not know where it landed. When people speak of Templar treasure, they usually imagine gold piled in secret vaults. Yet gold is a fragile kind of power. It can be stolen, melted, and redistributed. The Templars understood this better than most. Their real wealth was not easily counted. Relics carried authority. A fragment of bone, a sacred object, or an artifact tied to biblical history could command devotion and influence far beyond monetary value. If the Templars possessed such items, their importance would extend into theology itself. This possibility alone would justify extreme secrecy. Then there is knowledge. Texts, maps, genealogies, and philosophical writings can destabilize empires. Knowledge reshapes belief. It undermines hierarchies built on controlled narratives. For an order accused of heresy, knowledge would be the most dangerous treasure of all. Historians note that after the Templars' rise, their power did not behave like simple wealth. It expanded influence, not luxury. Their lifestyle remained austere. Their investments focused on infrastructure, networks, and autonomy. This suggests a long-term strategy rather than greed. If the treasure were only gold, it would have been found. Centuries of searching have yielded nothing definitive, but if the treasure was information, it could move quietly, copied, hidden, absorbed into other institutions. Money fades, secrets endure. The real question is not what the Templars owned, but what they knew and who inherited it after their fall. That inheritance may still shape history today. Despite the order's official dissolution, traces of the Templars did not simply vanish. In Portugal, King Denis refused to persecute them. Instead, he reorganized the order under a new name, the Order of Christ. Many former Templars joined openly, retaining lands, roles, and influence. This was survival through transformation. Scotland presents a stranger case, excommunicated and hostile to both England and Rome. It offered a haven outside papal reach. Legends claim Templars fought alongside Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn. Evidence is scarce, but the timing fuels speculation. Where authority weakens, hidden orders thrive. Across Europe, individuals disappeared into monasteries, noble households, and emerging institutions. An order can die on paper while its members live on quietly, carrying traditions, symbols, and knowledge forward. Historians argue this was coincidence, not conspiracy. Yet patterns emerge. Templar symbols appear in unexpected places. Architectural styles persist. Financial practices continue under different names. Survival does not require secrecy alone. It requires adaptation. The Templars had centuries of experience navigating danger. Dissolution may have been less an ending than a dispersal. If so, the order was never truly destroyed. It was diluted, scattered, and absorbed into the fabric of Europe. The question becomes not whether the Templars survived, but where they chose to continue their work unseen, and why silence, even now, still surrounds those possibilities. If the Templars' treasure still exists, it is unlikely to be a chest waiting to be uncovered. The most dangerous treasure is one that changes understanding, a document, a lineage, forgotten truth. Imagine evidence that challenges the origin of sacred authority, proof that doctrines evolved differently than taught, knowledge that faith was shaped by politics more than revelation. Such discoveries would not enrich individuals, they would destabilize institutions. This possibility explains the obsession with erasing the Templars' memory, not merely destroying men, but destroying credibility. Ridicule, heresy, and myth were tools to ensure anything associated with them would be dismissed as fantasy. If the treasure were knowledge, hiding it would be an act of responsibility, not greed. Some truths cause more harm than good when released into unprepared societies, or so the argument goes. Historians remain divided. Skeptics dismiss all treasure theories as romantic invention, yet the absence of evidence where abundance once existed demands explanation. What if fragments of that knowledge survived, scattered across archives, encoded in symbols, preserved in institutions that no longer remember their origins? What if history itself has been shaped by ideas smuggled forward from a condemned order? The most unsettling possibility is this: the treasure was never meant to be found. It was meant to endure quietly, influencing events without revealing itself. And if so, it may still be working long after the Templars disappeared from sight. Among the accusations leveled against the Templars, echoes of older heresies linger. Gnosticism, long condemned by the Church, taught that divine truth was hidden, accessible only through knowledge rather than obedience. Authority derived from understanding, not hierarchy. For the Church, this idea was lethal. Some scholars suggest the Templars encountered Gnostic texts in the East, preserved by Islamic or Christian sects older than Rome's authority. These writings challenged the nature of Christ, creation, and salvation. If introduced quietly into Templar philosophy, they would undermine everything the Church stood upon. The accusations of secret initiation rites and hidden teachings align disturbingly well with Gnostic structure, inner circles, progressive revelation. knowledge earned, not given. To medieval theologians, this was not merely heresy, it was rebellion against divine order. No surviving Templar texts confirm this outright, but suppression leaves few records. What remains are fragments, parallels, and hostile descriptions that may reflect misunderstanding or deliberate distortion. If the Templars embraced even fragments of forbidden belief, their danger lay not in practice, but implication. Authority rooted in knowledge cannot be easily controlled. It spreads through curiosity rather than command. This possibility reframes their destruction, not as punishment for crimes, but as preemptive defense against ideas too destabilizing to tolerate. History often buries such ideas beneath accusation and flame. Templar churches across Europe share unusual features, proportions. Repeat. Geometric precision exceeds medieval norms. Circular designs echo structures from the ancient world rather than contemporary Christian architecture. These similarities suggest shared knowledge, not coincidence. Sacred geometry was believed to encode universal truths through mathematics. Ancient civilizations treated it as both science and theology. If the Templars preserved such knowledge, they were guardians of something older than Christianity itself. Their exposure to Islamic scholarship in the East would have accelerated this. Mathematics, astronomy, and engineering flourished there while Europe stagnated. The Templars moved between worlds, carrying ideas few others understood. This raises uncomfortable questions. Were the Templars preserving ancient science under the guise of faith? Were their buildings more than places of worship, serving as repositories of encoded knowledge? Historians caution against overinterpretation. Medieval builders used geometry. Yet the consistency across distant sites suggests coordination. Patterns imply intention. If true, the Templars were not just warriors or bankers. They were curators of lost understanding, bridging civilizations while remaining invisible. Knowledge preserved in stone outlasts books and men. Even after the order fell, their architecture remained, silent but enduring. Perhaps the safest way to hide truth is to build it into walls, trusting time to erase its meaning. Few legends cling to the Templars like the Holy Grail. Scholars dismiss this as later invention, born of medieval romance. Yet myths often preserve distorted memories of real concerns. The idea of sacred bloodlines challenges religious authority profoundly. If holiness is inherited rather than granted by the Church, hierarchy collapses. The Grail legend, interpreted symbolically, represents legitimacy independent of doctrine. The Templars' rumored role as guardians of bloodlines may be metaphor rather than fact, but metaphors reveal fears. The Church feared challenges to its monopoly on divine legitimacy. These myths resurface repeatedly, attached to the same symbols, the same order, the same accusations. Repetition suggests unresolved anxiety. Historians separate fiction from fact. Yet, the persistence of these stories raises a question. Why do these legends refuse to disappear? Why do they attach so stubbornly to the Templars and no other order? Perhaps because they symbolize the ultimate threat, authority derived from something older, purer, and beyond control. Whether bloodline, relic, or knowledge, the implication is the same. Myths endure because they express what cannot be safely said. The Templars became vessels for those unspeakable possibilities, and once attached, such legends cannot be erased, only buried beneath ridicule and time. When the dust settles, one pattern emerges clearly. The Templars were not destroyed for battlefield victories, wealth, or political ambition alone. They were destroyed because they represented an alternative source of authority. Knowledge destabilizes power more effectively than armies. It questions narratives, exposes contradictions, and invites independent thought. Institutions built on obedience fear it instinctively. Whether the Templars possessed forbidden texts, ancient science, or philosophical insight matters less than perception. They were believed to know something others did not. That belief alone made them dangerous. History punishes truth-tellers not because truth is false, but because it threatens control. The brutality of the Templars' destruction reflects fear disproportionate to any proven crime. If they had been merely corrupt, reform would suffice. If merely rich, confiscation would do. Instead, memory itself was attacked. This suggests the real crime was knowing too much and refusing to surrender that knowledge. The Order's silence, its discipline, and its endurance all point toward protection of something intangible. Knowledge leaves no fingerprints, but its absence shapes history profoundly. The Templars' fall reminds us that the most effective way to control the future is to control what people are allowed to know. Political ambition, financial desperation, and religious authority all played roles in the Templars' destruction. Yet none alone explain the scale, coordination, and cruelty involved. Power fears rivals. Fear breeds justification. Control demands erasure. These forces converged on the Templars with unusual intensity. They controlled money without crowns, loyalty without nations, and knowledge without permission. That combination was intolerable. History often simplifies complex events, but simplification hides motive. The intensity of the response reveals the size of the perceived threat. The Templars represented a model of authority independent of traditional structures. That model could not be allowed to survive. Institutions tolerate tools, not equals. The Templars began as servants of the church, but grew beyond control. They became indispensable, and indispensable entities are always resented. When an order outgrows its masters, destruction becomes inevitable, not because it rebels, but because it exists. Destroying the Templars required more than killing men. Their reputation had to die. Heresy accomplished what swords could not. Memory was poisoned. This ensured no one would mourn them, imitate them, or ask what they had known. The Templar story persists because it reflects an eternal truth. Power fears knowledge. Some truths are buried not because they are false, but because they endure. And as long as authority depends on silence, the shadow of the Templars will remain, waiting, unresolved,